This is our Accreditation Mastery meeting, and what we're going to start by doing is there's quite a bit to cover. Some will take longer than others, but we're actually going to start with a rumor mill because there's a lot of stuff floating around. What's happening, what's going on, what have you heard? We'll talk about employment, ADS, vocab. We'll get into HCBS settings, community life engagement, behavior support, which is always, a hot topic. Medication administration, we have some new information for you there. And personnel, specifically County Board Administration rule and Rapback, which probably just took place, this past week. Waiting list also, again, recently implemented. And then we'll close with a 2018 citation data review, which you may or may not have seen the report, but it was sent out earlier this week, and it contains all of the citations of all of the reports we have to date. So that's going to be, kind of your best bet to see what citations are actually happening out there. So we're going to pass out some chart paper and some markers. So this is going to help us to gather some questions. If there's questions that we aren't able to answer today, those are going to be things that we're going to take back and we're going to see who we need to talk to. So just take about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll kind of look around to see how everybody's doing and write down your toughest questions that you're dying to know. What have you heard? Have you heard rumors, things that don't sound true, things that seem a little crazy? Go ahead and write all that down. Let's start with this group right here. What kind of questions did you have? Sure. So that first question we have a little bit in our presentation about the time limited, so I'll kind of save that when we get to that slide. As for the action steps, what I can tell you is that the best practice, if you will, when you talk to reviewers or you talk to, maybe Beth Chambers or Kelly Miller, a lot of what they're trying to stress is that there's collaboration. Okay, so it isn't just the fact that the provider's making the action steps in the action plan without the SSA really knowing. So a good time to start that conversation, from what they tell us, is when you're having either a team meeting or you're sitting down, maybe to do annual paperwork, or maybe you don't do that. But there would be a time where you would be collaborating with that provider to talk about, here's the outcomes, here's what we expect from you for the service that we're purchasing, and that's the time to say, hey, let's get together, let's collaborate, let's talk about what your action plan might look like and what those action steps could be. So really all of that's going to be around collaboration, right? Whose responsibility is it? I mean, ultimately, I guess if you write it into the ISP that way, that they need to create one and so on, it would be the responsibility of the provider. However, like I said, a lot of the focus is on collaboration and kind of helping that provider to create those steps. Because without that, what we see is some not really, not real great action plans or action steps, and sometimes they're kind of way off target from what you're trying to accomplish. So they say that's the moment of opportunity where you can speak to the provider, and if they're not really getting it as you're having that conversation, to give them support about what you would expect to see when you're coming back to check for progress or talk about how those outcomes are going. So maybe that's not been a discussion for the county boards, but I know for providers that was supposed to be the intent. Not really all of the providers were aware of that, so sometimes they continue to get the background checks, but that's a really good question that we could probably ask that and get a definitive answer for. Okay. So we'll be able to answer a couple of those. Katie, do you know, are you going to cover some of that, the transitional waiting list?
I can.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that. And I do have some information related to not only time limited, but also to for people that have been, in the workshop for a while or going to somewhere for a while. We will talk a little bit about that. So. How about your group? So answering that last question, I mean, as far as production value or what you want that to look like, you can go as big as you want. I think the two things that you need to remember are to be kind of open and honest with the conversation, about what your challenges have been and where your successes are. That's going to be, your kind of opening theme. Because what you don't want, at least for your opener, is for reviewers to go in later and then look where you have maybe a deficit and them to be surprised. So that's kind of one tip there. But as far as, whether you want movies or people coming in to speak, or, one county did red noses for the children, I think, or starving children and the Walgreens and everything, you can do it as much as you want. What I wouldn't recommend is scripted in the fact that we're going to read off of our sheet. Because generally, if you've got a piece of paper and you're reading it and you're somewhat monotone, the reviewers generally wouldn't be that engaged. So I don't think, the bigger you can make it is necessarily anything bad. But with that said, you will want to kind of stick to those timelines so that they don't, it doesn't go like 2 hours or anything. And then I think we can answer one more of those questions. I think the question was, there's a lot of citations happening during provider compliance review for the county boards, and how can you protect yourself against those citations? So the answer, I've spoke to a lot of different reviewers, and you're going to see a lot of different things with the plan of correction. They're a lot pickier about those plans of correction, and here's why. When they cite you during provider compliance, a lot of times in the past, they've cited, you give them, we're going to revise the ISP, we're going to have a team meeting, and that should be good. They come back, everything's okay, but it keeps happening. Basically, what they've been doing is chasing down POCs. So what they want to know on your POC, if you do get cited, is how are you addressing this at a systems level instead of just putting a Band-Aid on this individual person's kind of file to say, well, we corrected it, we're good to go, right? Not so much, because if they keep coming back and it keeps happening, they will continue to issue those citations until they feel like you're in a spot that you've got something good that's going to address the system as a whole. And that could take some time. So that's a conversation that you might want to have if you do get a citation, from a reviewer to say, hey, we want to do this right. We don't want you having to cite us all the time when you come in and you see it in this ISP, that ISP. Is this a good enough plan that we can address this at a systems level so that that doesn't happen? So that's one of the conversations that you can start when you have been issued that citation. So on to employment. You got the memos, right? All right, well, the first memo that went out was called Payment and Adult Day and Employment Services. It was issued, you can see here, June 11th. So these are some high-level topics I pulled. We're going to send out all the information. So I did pull these. You don't really need to write them down. We're going to send this out. But it basically says that CMS has made it clear that individuals participating in pre-vocational services may be compensated, all right? And pre-vocational services, vocational habilitation is one of those things as defined by CMS. It's also been made clear that habilitation services, specifically adult day support, may not provide for the payment of services that are vocational in nature. Keep that in mind, because that's what we're going to talk about in just a second. It's a violation of federal law to offer a Medicaid beneficiary an inducement, and here are some of the numbers that they had there. Retail value of no more than $15 per item, or $75 on an annual basis. With that said, we do have in here a packet. I didn't put the whole thing in here, but it's called Fact versus Fiction, and it's really around like ADS and vocab outcomes. So I don't think a lot of people have seen that, but I'm going to show a slide here in a little bit that will give you a taste of that. And we got that from OPSR. So that actually came from the reviewers to help you with some of those outcomes. So, the next memo. So the second memo came out, basically new guidance, vocational habilitation, issued just about a month ago. So this is what I said earlier about Ohio's vocational habilitation program is classified by CMS as, well, it's pre-vocational. Here's the part about the benefits or the compensation. What they've basically said is that since it's pre-vocational, vocational habilitation isn't actually work. So under Title 42, which was one of the things floating around when we were having these conversations, is the beneficiaries are compensated but at no more than 50% of the federal minimum wage. So that's the part about what they decided, with all of this guidance, is what somebody on vocab can get paid is basically half the minimum wage. Then, if a provider identifies, an area of noncompliance, this last piece just kind of says the provider needs to develop a plan by August 1st of next year to figure out how they're going to come into compliance with those payment pieces. Community employment outcome. This is one, I will tell you, people have sometimes kind of lost their minds about this one. There have been some counties that reviewers have went into, and now they have outcomes that look the same because they thought that meant that we needed a separate, specific community employment outcome. Here's what I can tell you. That is not the case from the reviewer's perspective, and we've been talking about this probably 3-4 years, I think now, since they added that community employment outcome onto the review tool. But let me tell you the sides of this story. My question is always kind of based around a scenario where, Bob is a really handy person and he fixes a lot of stuff. And that's a skill that he has that he could either share with people or he could, go to get employed to be a handyman. So when you start talking to Bob, you say, Bob, you really want to work in the community or what, what's happening, Bob? And he says, well, I think I'd be open to that. Yeah, I'd like to do that. It seems like a good opportunity. And they say, well, what would you do if you worked in the community? Well, I'd make more money. Well, what would you do with your money? Well, I'd buy myself, I'd get my own place. And what's desirable, the why. You keep going, why do you want your own place? Well, I live with 3 other guys right now, and I'm not really a people person. I don't really want to share my stuff and everything, so I value my privacy. I just want my own place to live alone. So that outcome might turn into something like, Bob works at Lowe's so that he can have his own place and enjoy his privacy. Makes sense, right? Keep in mind that underneath, you're going to want to talk about this time limited, what's that progression going to look like? And that helps with this community employment outcome, because remember, in service rule vocational habilitation, the ultimate outcome is competitive integrated community employment. So that's going to be how you can meet these requirements, but I want you to know some of the pushback, and you'll see some of this in a little bit. It's kind of black and white. David and I have had some discussions about this, that, Medicaid doesn't pay for you to get an apartment. They don't pay for you necessarily, to have your privacy or to be a handyman. They're really paying for that vocational habilitation service for you to be employed. So really keep in mind, if you're writing that service underneath an outcome, that it's not perfectly clear that you want to talk about time limited and you want to talk about that path to community employment. Yeah, so we can talk about that, though. It's a good conversation because it brings up another kind of introduction point, is that, anybody that receives vocational habilitation, that service has to be tied in an outcome somewhere. Now, when you get to path 1, you start asking, well, the person's worked at Pizza Hut for 30 years. They don't want to be a manager. They don't want any more hours. And that's fine. You know, there was never any expectation that we were going to force people to work a 40-hour work week or, you know, overtime or anything like that. So whatever they're comfortable with, you just want to make sure you're capturing that story so that we know it. But I really do want to caution you, while, you know, we look at it kind of, you know, as maybe it's not a real outcome because it's maintenance and they're continuing, the thing that would concern me is we want to keep an eye on that, because what do we do when somebody then begins to struggle and we don't have a system in place to identify they need that support to actually keep their job? Because what I've seen is in the past, before we got to this point, sometimes outcomes weren't identified because the person was already working. But then when, you know, you come back a month later, it was, man, Bill lost his job. And it was like, so we didn't identify any outcome there. Did you know he was struggling? Yeah, he's kind of having a hard time with life, and he was fighting and getting into trouble at work, you know, with his boss, and wasn't doing the work. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe we could have done a better job to identify that balance of important 4 and 2, and maybe added some support in there so that it didn't come to that point. So that's, you know, it's bad when somebody loses their job, especially if they lose income that was, in this particular case, I was told, you know, the guy has everything he wants, right? I hear this quite often. He has everything he wants, he doesn't want anything to change, and everything's good. But when I came back, it was not good. You know why? Because everything that he wanted was his job, where he saw his friends, and he saw his girlfriend, he made his money, and when he made his money, he went on dates with his girlfriend to the movies. They went out to eat, right? Guess what happened when he lost his job? He lost his money, he lost his dates, he lost his woman. So, you know, those are things that maybe we don't think of right off the bat, but that's really going to be what you want to do, to continue to tell that person's story. Maybe there's not a lot there, but just explain how they're doing, kind of as like an update. And that's really the best advice that I can give. I think David might have something to add.
And it's funny because I put the note down thinking this would get back to this side of the conversation. What I'm finding is it's as difficult to write an outcome for the 82-year-old as it is for the person that's 25 on place 1 and loves their job. Where it all goes back to for all those folks is what I know that I've told, you know, I preach the informed choice. As long as you're truly given informed choice, it actually brings that outcome back to life, and it tends not to be maintenance. And that means it could be for one person, if someone enjoys their job, it could be that through monitoring, you're sitting down, you're doing one of the person-centered tools with them, doing a working, not working, and actually checking in with them, truly asking, is everything going all right? Is there anything different? You know, those critical questions, and then maybe peeling that onion back from there. What that does is it gives you additional discovery, even though some of it may not be completely new. But, you know, lives are going to change as people grow, and as people get older, those important twos, the balance is always going to be changing. So I think folks who are really understanding the informed choice piece are starting to dig in and realize that as life changes, it may be small incremental changes in work, and it may not be that I just want to move up or move on. It could be small incremental changes within the workplace that allow you to continue monitoring that outcome and adjusting maybe action items as you go along.
So I was talking a little bit about that employment fact versus fiction. Here's just some of the things that are on the sheet that we got from OPSR. ADS is not a replacement for work. It's not an activity center where people get assigned to activities. Let's just point that one out right now. One of the red flags you'll see in language that I find all the time in ISPs, it says something along the lines of the person attends such and such and they will be sent a schedule. Like, that's going to be a red flag because it kind of implies that maybe they didn't play a part in helping to create that schedule. So just keep that in mind while we have that up there. It's not a place for busy activity to keep people alert and awake. It's not a disability-specific site where people can hang out for 5 to 7 hours a day, and so on. With vocab, this is what we talked about a little bit earlier. What it is not, a place to retire to or from. I think somebody else said that over here, a place to earn supplemental money. And then this last one right here, I didn't name all of them, but you can look in the packet, is a place where work doesn't match interests, strengths, priorities, or capabilities. Right? So that's going to be one of the things that they're definitely going to want to look at. Yeah, no,
Things have to be scheduled.
the question is, did the people have an opportunity to provide input in what they wanted their day to look like? And that's not necessarily every day, you know, but just the idea that it wasn't the staff came together, made this schedule, and hey, everybody, you get to pick. Do you like any of these? And maybe they do, maybe they don't. So that's the conversation to be had. David?
I would suggest that you start connecting some of your providers, and you maybe start with some of the providers who are starting to really think out of the box and connect them with other peers. I know that you've had some situations in Knox where folks have started really jumping out and trying things. Especially in the Southwest, there are providers down there now that do exactly what you're talking about. Now they do it at different levels. You can guide some of your providers to the Employment First website and look for the summit material, the employment summits for the providers, and they can call on some of the providers who have really moved away from the schedule, and they sit down every day with the folks they're supporting, and they go through the schedule. Some of them do it once a week, some of them do it every day, and they make decisions about what are we doing today, what are you doing today. A lot of times it's a little more person-centered depending on where they are on their own journey as a provider. So sometimes it's more group, sometimes it's a little less group. But they are taking the real input from those folks, and they are creating the schedule based upon 100% of what those folks want to do through the week. It's doable, it's hard, and it's a whole change of business and a change of mindset. But I sat in a couple of rooms in the Southwest and watched as they showed us their smart board or their flip charts or however they do it, and actually took us through the process and had folks sitting there in agreement that this is how we do it. So it was a great opportunity.
So we want to start by changing the conversations in our culture about what we consider work to be. Okay, again, work is generally defined as competitive integrated community employment. But here's the thing that we keep seeing, and if it's not a problem for you, that's great. You're ahead of the game. You must clearly distinguish between ADS versus vocab. I know they're very different things right now, and sometimes we still see, it called day array. Or I'll go places where it'll say ADS, and I'm like, well, that's the service authorized is actually vocational habilitation. So just be careful about what you're calling it and make sure that the services match. What about people who have been there forever? And this is kind of the general idea. No, we're not going to tell everyone that they lived a lie or that they've never received a real paycheck, right? However, we might need to have some tough conversations. If somebody really doesn't want that community employment, what does that mean and where does our flexibility kind of end with that? And I hear this a lot. The person I support doesn't want change. I talked about it earlier. They go there because all their friends and people they know go there. I hear that one quite a lot. And I'll tell you what ends up happening. That's where all their friends are. That was originally a lot of the first pushback that I got, right? They've been going there. That's where they meet everybody. And usually that changes the reviewer's line of questioning a little bit to, can you tell me more about they only get to see their friends and people they care about at the day site? So now you've went from like maybe a possibility of the wrong selection of service into, almost a settings or community life engagement conversation. So HCBS settings, community life engagement, let's start with the settings. Really, the main thing to look at right now, there is a physical portion of the settings, but that's clearly captured in one of the review tool elements. This one I wanted to talk about specifically is 2.014, and it just talks about during service planning, did the team explore the least restrictive services and settings, right? This is going to be a conversation a little bit in behavior support about least restrictive, but you'll see things in there on the review tool like was a description of all the services and settings available to the waiver or through the waiver. Was it all available to the individual when they're enrolled? Were they given opportunities to choose a service, or like we talked about earlier, a combination of services? And this is kind of going to be a new one. What have you looked at around technology, right? As we start having more conversations about remote supports and different types of ways that people can be supported, that's going to be a question that they probably ask you at your roundtable. That is usually a common topic. Are you utilizing remote supports or any kind of technology? Could you kind of tell us about that? So that's just one section. The other one's 11, and really it just talks about where waiver services provided in a setting that's not publicly operated or privately operated facility, right, institution, all of those physical location aspects. So we did hear a little bit about what's the SSA's responsibility in that. There are some requirements. If you get a new site, you want to go look at it. Make sure it doesn't fall with any of these physical location things. And then the other piece that you really want to look at is, is the setting matching what, the person intends to do? And that's what we talked about a little earlier. Why are they there? If we can't figure out why they're there, there's a problem. And one of the things they look at is called the 3 Ps. They may go back to look at plan, policy, or procedure. And one example I can give you, probably about 4 years ago, I saw a woman walk into her day site that I had read her file for accreditation. And I was a little curious because her outcome was that she will be nicer to her coworkers. So I really was interested to know, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because to me it sounded like maybe she didn't really want to be there. So I saw her walk in, she put her lunch down, she sat in the corner for about 10 minutes. And I went up to her and I asked her, I said, hey, what's going on? My name's Nathan, here's what, I looked at your file. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about how things are going? And she said, sure. And I said, well, I'd like to start. You had an interesting outcome. It said that you were going to be nicer to your coworkers. And I said, what do you think about that? And she said, that's terrible. And I said, well, what's terrible? She said, that outcome. And I said, why? She said, well, I don't like these people. And I was like, what? Well, that was what I suspected, right? When I read it, it looked like a little forced outcome. I said, well, what, who don't you like? She's like, I don't really like people. And I was like, so why are you coming here? And do they have stuff here that you like to do? And she's like, no, not really. So I'm like, wow, this is really not going so well, right? Those are red flags. Like, what are you doing here then? So finally I asked her, I said, well, tell me about a day that's good for you. Good day, bad day, right? Bad day, obviously, there's nothing that you want to do. Maybe you don't want to talk to people. What's your good day? And she said, well, at least once a month or twice a month, we do stuff that I love it, I enjoy it, and that's why I come here. And it was like, oh, well, that makes a little more sense, but now we're back to that outcome. It's like, yeah, the outcome might be a little bit off. So that was where we had a conversation, why. And guess what? That linkage of when you're looking at, is this okay or is this not? When we went back to look at her ISP to see if it matched what she kind of talked about, it didn't really say anything about people. It actually said she was going to get friends and be nicer to her coworkers. So those are like red flags that you might notice. Yeah, and if something's not right, like I said, the initial question is why? Why is what I'm seeing different than what I thought I was going to see? And that's where they may go back if, there is a red flag and look at the plan. Is anything out of the ordinary? So, community life engagement, this is a big one. It really can be boiled down to just a few points. Are people being given opportunities, if they want them, to make new connections out in the community? I'll tell you a quick story. Everybody knows, actually probably half of you could write an ISP or discovery on me because I always tell stories. But I had sinus surgery, and just to tell you, that was not that much fun. I didn't realize they were moving bone and everything else. Well, 2 weeks after I had my sinus surgery, I went to, get my maybe second ever, the masseuse, does the massage. It's supposed to be tranquil and peaceful and everything else. No, it was going pretty well until, she started massaging my head. I was like, oh, that's really nice. I didn't know they did that. And then all of a sudden, crack, she had pushed down on my nose and re-broke it. I was like, what am I going to do? This heating pad's on. I feel sick, right? So anyway, it was not a good experience. She broke my nose. She re-broke my nose. So finally, I got up. We got in the car, and I'm like, I'm dizzy. I'm like seeing white. I'm going to pass out. I actually had my fiance pull the car over so I could get sick, and I got sick. And she said, well, don't forget, we got an appointment next week, baby. And I was like, oh no. So knowing me, my fiance is somebody that wants to connect with everybody. She calls herself an empath, and people always tell her their story. The third week we went, and she was connecting with the massage therapist, and at the end, no, I didn't get a broken nose or get sick, but I was in some weird kind of a group hug, and I'm like, oh, no, oh, yeah, bring it in, bring it. Don't ask. But the point is, for my fiance, she wants those connections. She wants to know, how's your life? Do you have kids? Where do you work? What are you passionate about, right? Almost like she's interviewing as like an employee. But for me, if you were to read my support, it would say, Nathan's that guy that, when he goes to Walmart, and that's a different story. But when he goes to Walmart, he wears his dark sunglasses, puts his hood up. He's not really trying to stop and have a conversation. And if you were one of my friends, you'd know, unless you call me or text me, I'm not answering the door. So again, not everybody's going to want to make community connections, but for those people that do, how are they being given opportunities to do that? The focus obviously is on day waiver service providers. And my question became, when we started talking about this, I was a provider for many, many years. I started asking, is it possible that people are already making connections in the community? And when I thought about it, the answer is yes. Do you remember in person-centered thinking training or exposure, they talked about, right, I didn't know everybody liked to go bowling every Saturday, right? Kind of like, oh, okay, well, everybody's going. Well, here's what I can tell you. Out of the 12 guys that went bowling, where I would go bowling as a provider, no, maybe not everybody had a passion about bowling. But there was one gentleman named Jerry, and Jerry's a really cool guy. I think he got to go to Las Vegas. He got to go to a bunch of different places, right? And when Jerry came into the bowling alley, guess what happened? They got his shoes ready. They knew what size he wore. He got, the bartender got his cherry Sprite ready. And when Jerry didn't show up, they asked where Jerry was at, like you were talking about earlier. And that's a sign that while we may not have noticed that before, guess what? That is something that's already happening for how he's connected to his community. So sometimes these things are already happening, and we just need to be a little more aware of it so that we can capture that. And the question becomes, where do we put that? I always get asked, where do we put that, right? People use different planning formats. The bottom line is this. If you want to hold day waiver service provider accountable for trying to give those opportunities, you just want to make sure that it's clear, here's provider A, here's provider B, here's how they're giving opportunities to that person. Because if it's just written as an important to make connections, it's not 100% that those providers will pick up on that as their specific responsibility. Again, here's one about church. This is a funny little cartoon, but I started to notice churches are getting a lot more, they have a lot more things to do. I drove past one church, they had like a movie night, they had inflatable kids things, they had dunk tanks, they had all kinds of stuff going on. So you think about that, it draws a lot of people in from the community. So one of the places that reviewers would start when people were kind of struggling is, well, who does the person connect with now that isn't a paid staff? That's a real good place to start. If they're not connecting with anyone outside of paid support, then that's kind of seen as an opportunity to increase their connections if they want them. Don't overthink it. Remember the story about Cookie. So here's a story about Cookie, and it really starts with transportation, because sometimes transportation can be a struggle for people, getting out, getting around. And during one accreditation, there was a line in the ISP, and if you see this, it's a red flag, that said that Kelly can only schedule transportation 72 hours in advance. It was a really in-depth kind of paragraph. And when the reviewer asked the SSA director, could you tell me more about this? The SSA director was like, well, they don't really have staff. They have ratios, and he happens to be able to go out by himself. And it's like, well, what opportunities have you afforded him? Have you looked at other transportation? And the SSA director wasn't quite, sure about every little detail. So the reviewer said, well, let's just go talk to Kelly. That'll fix it. So Kelly worked in a movie theater, and when we went in, the first thing, the reviewer introduced herself, told her who she was and why she was there, and said, tell me about what you do on the weekends. Well, where do you go? I said, well, I go out and watch bands. Oh yeah, where do you watch bands? Well, I go to the Eagles and I watch bands and I have a few drinks and everything like that. And it was like, well, Kelly, what do you do if you don't have transportation? It's like, oh, I don't know. I said, well, do you get to go everywhere that you want to go? Well, no, not really. And then it was like, uh-oh. Well, let's try to ask a few more questions here. And said, well, tell me what happens when you're at the Eagles and you're watching that band and you look, it's closing time. What happens? And he said, oh, well, I go home. Well, how do you get home if you don't have transportation? Well, I either take a taxi or get a ride from my friend Cookie. And literally the reviewer said, well, why didn't you just say that? That was all they wanted captured, was just that explanation, not a big list of reasons why they can't go somewhere or how they have to schedule that transportation, but they're already doing it on their own. They didn't always need transportation from the staff. So it just kind of looked a little bit weird. But remember, there could be people that we just haven't even really asked the right questions that they're interacting with. And that's where you'd want to start. Who is the person closest to? A relationship map could be one kind of tool that you could utilize. So we're going to move on here to behavior support. The reason I put these up there is because right now, the hot topic is licensed facilities, right? Beth said it, I think Kelly Miller said it, that they want to get to a point culturally where they can walk into a licensed home and not know that it's a licensed home. So, you talk about the refrigerator. I think Beth said a joke about, I like to look in my refrigerator. I don't know about you, but sometimes I just like to open it up, right? And then Kelly Miller has the best one. She said, you put my weight up on the refrigerator one time, just once, and you see what happened. But with that said, maybe there are people that are working on that, and they want that as a reminder to be able to, accomplish their goal of maybe losing weight, feeling better, looking better, things like that. So keep that in mind. The update, one thing we just want to point out, I'm going to go through these kind of rapidly. This is always an area of focus, but I want you to know some of the highlights. And all of these citations for behavior support will be in the data review packet. You can look at them separately if you want. But one of the ones we saw right off the bat was, did each county board complete an analysis of behavioral support strategies that include restrictive measures? And what that is county boards are responsible, if it's their committee or should be completed at least annually, must be shared with the HRC. And there's some requirements here, not limited to nature and frequency of risk of harm, number of strategies reviewed, approved, duration, things like that, effectiveness of the strategies. Those are all things that you're going to want to have in your annual analysis. But we did see, I think there was probably about 3 citations for that counties did not have that annual analysis. Here's the big one though. That's a lot of areas for citations to occur in behavior support. All right. They usually start with risk of harm or legal sanction. Is it there? Isn't it there? Generally speaking, is there intervention needed? Is there an emergency? Or could it become an emergency very quickly? Now, risk of harm isn't always as clear in every situation. So what I want to remind you of, there was a memo that went out maybe about a week or 2 ago that talked about how are you ensuring that your strategies are temporary in nature. And they said that a fading strategy or fading plan is not the only way to prove that strategies are temporary in nature. But this is going to be one of the key pieces that you're going to want to hit upon. So what does that mean if it's not a fading plan? Well, you can have a reduction of strategies. I would definitely recommend from the time that you implement it that you talk about what you need to see before it will go away. But you don't have to actually have that fading plan. But it is a good idea. We definitely recommend it. And with that said, what else could be something that shows it's temporary in nature? Well, you could talk about teachable moments. One of the things we found that's kind of the new buzzword, teachable moment, is that sometimes we've tried to prevent things from happening. So we never actually were teaching people skills to be successful in something that they wanted. One of the things that keeps coming up a lot right now is online dating. good, the bad, and the ugly. There's some dangerous situations, right? There could be some legit risk of harm, and we've seen that in some of the files. But what we're not seeing as much of is if somebody really wants to have a meaningful relationship, at what point are we going to model to them or talk to them about what a healthy relationship looks like, instead of just constantly saying, well, we're going to try to prevent these things from happening? At what point can we say, hey, here's maybe what you would expect to happen in a healthy relationship? So keep in mind, teachable moments is another one. The other one that was surprising to me was the HRC member training. That's not one that they really want to cite you on because it's not a lot of work to do, but you do want to make sure that your members are receiving that training. Restricted measure notifications, I don't know if you saw that, but they have a new way to do that. They put out a video, which we can also probably share when we send out the information. We saw some citations there. And then one that we should probably talk about because I keep seeing it is interwoven. They brought this up at the beginning of the year, and I tried to ask several different ways, but what they don't want to see is just basically the behavior support strategy just kind of copied and pasted into a single section. If that's something that you end up seeing a citation for, know that that's one that they're super focused on. I saw a provider within the last month that got cited 3 times for their not having interwoven plans. So just kind of keep that in mind. I know they want it spread out, and it makes it a little harder that way, but just keep in mind, if it looks like it's something separate, it's generally the way that they're going to go with it, that it might have just been copied and pasted into it. So they want it throughout, integrated, interwoven. One of the gauges is the best way that you see it is that you can't really even tell that it's all there. The support just flows. So that's something we're going to have to work on, especially since depending on which plan you use, you may or may not have a specific risk section. You may have risks after each section. It's just kind of going to depend. Medication administration. We're going to talk about this just real quickly. These are all the issues that we see. Issues with the assessment, old forms being used, incomplete or incorrect. A lot of times we see conflicting information with the assessment versus the ISP. And then, the medication administration needs are not being clearly identified. I spoke to Janet Winterstein yesterday, and she said to remind people that assistance is a really big thing that you need to define. And I didn't know this. I actually learned something new from her yesterday, that the 3 types of assistance, right, time reminders, help to open the container, and then help to get it to your mouth, those are universal across all of Ohio's nurses, regardless of what field. So that's where that came from. I did not know that. But she said if you talk about assistance, reviewers, nurses, we're going to assume it's one of the 3 types. So if it's not, you're going to need to define what you're talking about there. And if it is assistance, you still need to define that. PRN medication, a lot of the time, it's just that the protocol is not clear enough as to rule out independent judgment. Remember, if you've heard me talk about Walmart, right, we see PRN, mostly psychotropic, but it really applies to any PRN medication. But let's use that example. If I'm being given 1 milligram of Ativan for agitation, right, that's not going to cut it. For stressful situations, we probably all have different stressful situations. Mine, like I said, is going to Walmart. I'll sweat here, just start thinking about going to Walmart. I ain't going to Walmart unless you give me my 1 milligram Ativan, right? Because you're going to see me start to get upset, right? I'm going to start sweating. I'll probably start to turn red. There's a bunch of stuff that Walmart's my stressful situation. So be sure that you're writing that protocol clear enough as to rule out independent judgment. This, I just want to cover it real quickly because it's come up more and more again, Ohio's medical marijuana program. So here's what we know about it so far. Right now, there's no provision in our rules to be able to accommodate medicinal marijuana, and I'll just kind of explain why. Because it's not a prescription, it's not written basically with a clear enough protocol that any of our nurses are going to be able to administer it. Therefore, if our nurses cannot administer it, they cannot have our staff administering it. So right now, Ohio's law does not provide for that administration. And that's just from Janet Winterstein. Now, I will tell you, this was something I was surprised about, is that she said the Ohio Attorney General has said that CBD oil is not legal in Ohio. And what I found out was it's not something that's regulated. So you could go in, if you talk to, I actually talked to some of the physicians too in our area, it's not regulated, so you don't always know what you're going to get. And even the refined ones still have, although it's minuscule, certain percentage of THC, even if it's decimal. So our Attorney General has said that that is not going to be legal just to sell off the shelf in Ohio. I get a lot of questions about that.
There's like 4 different training requirements. They have to get background checks, and I think it was, I wasn't sure if it was registry checks. There's a whole bunch of stuff now for any provider. And then every 5 years, they have to get a BCI check done on them. So there was a lot of changes to the volunteer piece with the County Board Administration rules. So those of you who have FANS programs in them, or programs that are similar to FANS, where you get a lot of people volunteering, signing up, you might want to look at that County Board Administration rule, see how it applies to your FANS program. Is there anything we got to do to adjust it? Because there was a lot of requirements in there that I was really surprised to see that many. It's a significant change. Like I said, it's not looked at accreditation yet, but it's a significant rule change and it may get addressed. The other big change in the County Board Administration rule was they added a whole bunch of stuff around wait lists. Now remember, they came out with a wait list rule, but they also had some stuff in the County Board Administration rule about wait lists for non-Medicaid services.
Okay, well, we all know it changed or is changing, went into effect September 1st.
Has anybody went out and did the wait list assessment yet?
Hopefully we've started.
Because those people who are up for redeterminations, those are the ones who are supposed to be doing them prior to their redeterminations. So anybody's on the wait list now, your transitional wait list, as your redetermination comes into play. So if you had a redetermination today, technically you're supposed to have that wait list assessment done prior to their redetermination. So
we were hoping to look at that a little differently. Because technically, we try to work 90 days ahead of time. So
right.
Your plan and your re-dep meeting has already occurred in an ideal world. Now, that's not the case in every situation. So, if people had, 9/2 redetermination date, hopefully we've already done their plan. So we weren't looking at trying to do their assessment yet. We were going to wait till next year.
Exactly.
Right.
We're
Okay.
waiting next year.
All right.
And we haven't heard how they're going to enforce it. They, obviously you have 2 years to get the wait list done. And so we'll see. We haven't heard anything from the reviewers yet about how they're going to address this, what they're going to be looking for. The other thing we can say for accreditation standpoint is make sure you update your policy.
We're looking at get policy and making sure we do it in the assessments in 30 days. Because, we've started to get our policies this week.
So some type of tracking mechanism is what you'll want in place for that. At a glance tracking mechanism.
So hopefully you have some kind of plan for that transitional list. You've looked at it, who needs to be done first. I'm sure there are people on there that you don't know where they live anymore. All your contact information's out of date. How are you going to get a hold of them? What are you going to do? Hopefully you're having those conversations already. I suspect if they ask at review time, it will be, what is your plan? What are you doing? So I also put together that data report. So I'm just going to hit the highlights really quick. I looked at reviews conducted through the first half of this year. And we were able to get 18 of 21 county boards reports that were reviewed. We had a total of 77 citations across all 18 county boards, and it sort of flipped between assessment planning and monitoring and behavior support, which was number 1 and which was number 2 as reports came in, but those were the 2 biggest areas. Contracts and waiver admin, I think consistently are pretty low, and then followed by MUI and personnel was 3rd and 4th.
I did want to take a minute to just talk real briefly about MUI, a couple things that we saw. If you read in the report, you'll see cause and contributing factors is one that they look at, that we've heard those conversations happen before. But there's a couple new things that you should know, actually, while we're thinking about it. 2 of the things they're going to want to look at closer than anything is choking and falls. If you saw, Director Martin actually did a video on choking. And the reason that they're looking at choking and falls is because they say those are basically, should be 100% preventable. And I think as of about 2 months ago, I believe there was more than a dozen people that had died from choking year to date. So that's really something, if you're doing your planning and it says somebody should slow their eating pace or, needs reminders to chew, there's going to be a lot of questions about why. Was there a swallowing avow? What do we know? What have you done? Why do they need this special diet? Right? It's fine. It's not restrictive if it's a medical. You have dysphagia or something like that. But they really are going to stress, those situations. One other thing that we saw several citations happen. I'm not sure how they're captured totally in the report. I didn't read the specifics, but I can tell you that they really focused on the investigators interviewing the PPIs. And it was like, well, they lived 4 hours away and we left a voicemail. That is not going to be sufficient, as an effort to just say, oh, we called them once and that was good. We're not good. We want to make sure we try to find that PPI and really get that interview. So I just wanted to, while we're talking about it, a couple things that just crossed my mind.
And the other thing around the MUI piece of that, and I know Katie has a slide here for MUI, is we've seen this jump into what we call the big 3. It traditionally has not been in the top 3 citation areas, and it's moved up, as you can see now for this year. It started to trend that way last year towards the end of the year, but there's a lot more citations around MUI. This is data across the state, not necessarily for this region. Our region has really, really low numbers on MUI citations.
So I just thought I'd throw in here again, it's also in the report, the sort of the top in each area. So for that assessment planning and monitoring, the most are for unclear use of person-centered planning to develop the ISP and outcomes. If you read the actual citations, they are looking for that thread. Like if they read an outcome that implies an interest in something that doesn't list or exist anywhere else in that ISP or discovery, that's the stuff they're looking at. I do kind of encourage you to read the actual citations and see how they came to them, because they will quote examples of language and the outcome and why they came to that determination. And then that last one, so all this stuff about vocab and day array, and if you're on path 4 but you're getting vocab, they are citing that in the, it's a waiver service citation, that the waiver service doesn't match the purpose of the outcome. So we have started seeing that.
And the others see the 3rd bullet there around the community integration. We didn't see these citations last year. So these are all new citations that are really coming out.
Yeah, and a couple of just things to throw on top of this that we do kind of know is that these 10 citations for ISP or / assessment, that's actually kind of a high number, because if you recognize when they changed the review tool, they actually rolled up 2.001 into 2.002. So instead of getting 2 citations, you normally would get just the 1, but that's still where they're happening. So it's not that it's really any better. You want to watch that. And then what is it? That last part about the steps or the supports being inconsistent. Just as a general reminder, if somebody's at ADS and they're doing work-like activities, that may be, the question where it has been raised that you've selected the wrong service. They told us if it looks like work and the person's, gaining a wage, then you might have selected the wrong service. And yes, that could be a problem if the person does not want community employment, but they want that paycheck. I think that's a question that a lot of us kind of have at the moment about, which way does that go and how does that conversation happen? So I did want to point that out, though. If it looks like work, feels like work, they're probably going to say it should have been selected as a vocational habilitation service. So.
And then the most frequent behavior supports, which Nathan talked a little bit about already. The annual analysis, I mean, yeah, there were 3 for those, and not the risk of harm and the HRC approval, that timeline for the HRC approval, that's got to be clear that there is whatever form you're using, that signature date, that approval date is before the measure was implemented. Unless it's an emergency and then you have some sort of verbal consent that you can document. Then we talked about the MUI, cause and contributing factors. And then they did cite around documentation in terms of review and incident-specific questioning. And again, it goes back to that interview and that investigator. What documentation are they collecting? What are they looking at when they make their determination?
Yeah, and I've been in a couple MUI exits where they said, especially for category C, we want to know who was there, who was present, what happened. And it's kind of like we want to know more than, just sitting at dinner and all of a sudden the table's overturned and the cops are here. What happened, who was there, what was said, that's a kind of a focus that we know from some of the MUI exits.
And then background checks, timely, and registry checks, timely for new hires. And then so we put together a little bit of recommendations as well, which Nathan touched on a lot of them. So for that planning and assessment, ensuring that your outcomes reflect the results of the discovery and assessment and are measurable. Ensuring that you have that access to the full community, that the waiver service matches the support, matches the identified purpose of the outcome. And then ensuring that there is documentation of progress and monitoring. We did see some sites there. That's either outcome progress documentation or in a case note, some concern was raised and then there's no evidence that it was ever followed up on. That actually is also where the lack of revision to your ISP citation can come from. They see something in a case note that indicates, hey, there probably should have been an update to discovery or the ISP, and they don't see it, they can cite you for lack of revision. And then again, making sure you have that behavior support process consistent, thorough, you're following it, making sure everybody understands what a restrictive measure is and isn't. And then providing checklists if you need to help everyone with those things, with that process, with what the measures are, what is risk of harm.
There is something new here that I want to bring up just so it's not a surprise. OPSR sent out is either a memo or an email to the reviewers. I'm not sure who all saw it, but it was the one that talked about temporary in nature, restrictions being temporary in nature. There was one additional requirement that described there is an expectation by the reviewers at this point. We don't know, how they'll implement it or what that will look like, but I'll send you what they wrote, and it said that a provider should be trained well enough that they can speak to how they're set up to ensure these restrictions are temporary in nature. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you want to get a little, what I would call risky and not go with those fading plans, like an idea about it at first, they definitely would want to talk about, teachable moments or something that would kind of show the providers aware that these are supposed to be temporary in nature. Again, we don't know what that will look like, but I'll make sure you get that piece of information when we send that out.
Katie, can you go back to the slide with the graph on it?
Yep.
There? So the other thing I want to point out about this graph is looking at this, from a systems perspective of how often, these reports, we did all that data from last year. Now looking at through halfway through this year, is what we've seen is behavior supports has always been at the top. And now it's kind of sliding down. This is that new focus from DODD that Beth Chambers talked about. She said that, you know, we were doing a disservice by not citing county boards on outcomes. That's why these numbers have changed. So it is, real focus is on assessment, planning, and monitoring. This is where their focus is. It's been on behavior supports. People have struggled for years, but now you can kind of see through the data, this is what's coming out.